Hello, glad to see you back. Last time we created the user profile page, and this time we're gonna add the option to follow users. Alright, so here in the schema.sql file, the relations we did until now, for example, a post belongs to a user through the user ID, a comment belongs to a post through the post ID and also to a user through the user ID. So these are one-to-many relationship. So a user has many posts, or the opposite, a post has one user. But for this case, for the followers, we need a relationship between the user themselves. So a user can follow another user. So this relationship refers to itself. And for that, we're gonna use an additional table here that's gonna link two users. So we're gonna call this table user follows. And on this table, we're gonna have the user who started following another user and the user who is the target of the follow. So this field here is gonna reference a user, and this is gonna be the user who started the follow action. And this one right here is gonna reference the one who is the target of the follow. We're gonna add the typical timestamp. And now we don't have a primary key as the other tables. They all have an ID we can reference. So in this case, we're gonna use a composite key. And it's gonna be of the two foreign keys here. So the follower ID and the followed ID. All right. We are also gonna need update the users table here and include the followers count and also the following count. Now we're gonna come here to the queries.sql file, and at the bottom we're gonna add a new query to insert a user follow. Like this. So we pass the follower ID and the followed ID. We need to know if a user follow already exists. So like this, we're gonna select and check if user follow exists, passing both the follower ID and the followed ID. I think we also need to check if user ID exists. We don't have a query for that. So maybe here, I'm gonna add that. And there we go. So we had before the exist by email and also by username, but we didn't have by user ID. Apart from this, we also need one to update the user and increase the followers count and the following count. Like this. So very similar to the post count. We are just gonna increase it by a value here. All right, we are done. Let's run SQL generate. This should have updated the queries.sql file. So our create user follow method is here. These are the parameters and this is the method itself. And this is gonna return a timestamp when the follow was created. All right, looks correct. Now we're gonna create a new file to work with the user follows. And here we're gonna add a new method to a service to follow a user. So here's an argument we like to pass the user ID you want to follow. And this is just gonna return an error. All right, the first step is to validate this user ID. We need to define this error. Like this. Now the next step is to check that we are authenticated. Now we need to check that the user ID here is not the same from here, so you cannot follow yourself. Maybe this error. Something like this. Next, we also need to check that the follow between these two users doesn't exist already. For that, we're gonna use our new query. So the follower ID is gonna be the authenticated user ID, and the followed ID is gonna be the one from the argument. So if we are already following this user, we're gonna just return with a nil, I think. So this is not gonna be an error, it's just gonna return early, you know. Now we need to check that the user ID, this one, is from an existing user. Like this. So we pass the follow user ID to the user exists method. And if this doesn't exist, we're gonna return with this error, user not found. All right, now we can finally insert the user follow relationship. So the follower ID is gonna be the authenticated user ID, and the followed ID is gonna be the follow user ID from the argument. This is gonna return the created at timestamp, but we don't need it, so we are just gonna check on the error. All right, now we're gonna increase the following count of the authenticated user. Like this. So we're gonna update the authenticated user ID, and we're gonna increase the following count by 1. We're gonna do similar for the target user. There we go. So this time we pass the follow user ID from the argument, and we're gonna increase the followers count. So this is increasing the following count, and this is the followers count. All right, and I think we're done. So let's write a test for this new function. All right, so the first test we're gonna do is check for the invalid user ID. Like this. So we pass an invalid user ID, and we expect to get this error with this message, invalid user ID. The next test can be authenticated check. So in this case, we're gonna pass a valid ID, like so. And because we're just passing the background context, we expect to get unauthenticated. Now the next error could be this one, so can follow yourself. So to test this, we're gonna need an authenticated user. So we're gonna use our generate user function. It's gonna give us a user that we can put inside the context. So we can use this new context with user as argument, and which will be authenticated now. And if we pass the same user ID, we expect to get the error. Like this. Let's rename this. There we go. Now the next error should be user not found. Let's copy part of this. So this time we're gonna pass the ID of a user that doesn't exist, so a random ID. And we expect to get user not found error. And the next test is gonna be just the OK case, I think. So for this, we're gonna pass a valid ID. So we are gonna generate a new user and pass the ID here, like so. And we expect no error. We also have one additional that is for, in the case the follow already exists. This one. If this exists, we expect no error. So let's test for that. So let's save this into a variable. And on the second time we execute this, we expect no error because we are already following this user. All right, I think that's it. So let's run this test. Perfect, no error. All right, the next part will be to add a button here below the username on the user page to follow the user. So let's come here to the user template, and maybe down below here, if the user is authenticated, we are gonna show the button, but also we don't want to show the button for ourselves. So we're gonna add an additional check here like this. So this is the not equal operator. So if we are authenticated and the authenticated user ID is not the same one as this user, only there we're gonna show the button to follow the user. So for the button, we're gonna add a form. It's gonna make a request to user follows, maybe. The method is gonna be a post request, and we're gonna add the button here that says follow. And there is an input of type hidden with the user ID, and the value is the user ID of this page. All right, let's see how it looks. Oops, we got an error. We updated the schema and the user table, but it was not applied. Yeah, on this part, we just updated the table without doing an alter table. So for now, we're just gonna delete the database and start again. So let's stop cockroach, remove the cockroach directory, and restart the cockroach server. Now we got a different error. So let's see. This field is called is logged in. There you go. So we don't see the button here, but let's log out and create a new user. So I just created John, and I'm gonna log out from here and log in back as Nicolas. I'm gonna visit John's profile, and there we go, there is the button. Now we need to create a handler for this path. So let's do that. So in the web package, we're gonna create a new file for the user follow. And here we're gonna create a handler to follow a user. And we're gonna register this handler in the roots. So the URL was user follows, I think. The method is a post request, and the handler is follow user. So inside of here, we're gonna first parse the form. And in case of error, we're gonna log the error and we're gonna redirect back. To redirect back, we use the request refer, like this. And we're also gonna set an error inside the session, like so. Now we can call the service to follow a user. Don't forget to take the context from the request, because this is an authenticated context. And here we're gonna pass the follow user ID. We take that from the request form. All right. For this error, we're gonna do the same. We're gonna save the error inside the session and redirect back. And finally, we're just gonna redirect back without any error. All right, now here in the user handler, when we show the user page, here we need to display this error. So in the handler at the bottom here, we need to set this error and take it from the session. So we use the pop method, so the error is cleaned up afterward. If I hit follow there, I'm redirected back. I don't see an error. Actually, we are not displaying there in the template, so let's come here to the user template. We're gonna show this error message in case the user follow error is set. Anyhow, I think we didn't get any error, so I'm gonna check on the database if the user exists. So there we go. I did a query to the user follows table, and I see one row, and this is the follow we just created by hitting this button here. All right, next, once we hit this button should toggle to unfollow the user. But we're gonna leave it here for today, and that's gonna be for the next video. Make sure to leave any question down below, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. See ya.